So if we left the first part of the chapter, but the last video, with the question of what led Western society to kind of create more division and remove humans from the animal world, um, then we start this session with kind of we start this video with trying to respond to that question. If you remember, um, the previous period in history was considered a more communal coexistence between humans and animals, where there was balance and reciprocity, and both humans and animals were thought to have moral and spiritual standing, and a lot of religious belief systems incorporated animals into those systems. So here we're moving to a different historical period, speciesism and the rise of the human-animal border. So again, we'll read a little bit more about these historical periods in a reading for next week, but this period could be thought of as being from about 10,000 years ago to about 1800. So these periods are vast amounts of times, thousands and thousands of years. But what began to create this social constructed border between humans and animals and begin to shift our thinking and shift the way we construct humans and animals in society? One of the things is the notion of hierarchy. Hierarchical ordering becomes more prevalent in how humans see animals and how humans actually see each other. So not only are humans beginning to separate themselves from other animals and consider themselves superior to other animals, humans are also creating a lot of hierarchical unequal systems within society between humans. So I'm just gonna read a few sentences to describe this. Large-scale civilizations arose and social hierarchies and inequality grew. Though humans dominated animals in the course of these millennia, and the ideology of speciesism, which is an irrational belief in human superiority. So a definition of speciesism could be an irrational belief in human superiority. The ideology of speciesism was born. Animals were generally considered beings who experienced pleasure in playing and also had distinct interests and preferences. So one of the key things that that happened here was the domestication of animals. I think in the next slide, if I can make this go to the next slide, we see that 10,000 BC is about when some of the very first animals were being domesticated. And to domesticate animals means to own and control them and to use them for human purposes. So some of the earliest domesticated animals might include sheep, goats, cattle. And the domestication was directly linked to agriculture and beginning to move from a hunter-gatherer society to an agricultural society where the labor to create fertile land was done by animals. So the first early domesticated animals were not used for food, they were used for labor. And during this period also, philosophers and thinking also kind of adapted to these new social realities. The new social reality here being the advance of agriculture, which allowed people to settle down in places and develop civilizations that were less mobile, that were fixed and became towns and villages and communities. In order to do that, we created hierarchy, which allowed us to control and own non-human animals. This is also kind of coincides and coexists with hierarchy within human society too, because now we also begin to have people owning things and we have status differences between people, higher status people, lower status people. So hierarchy begins to develop along with these agricultural changes. Then eventually, the 1800s, so we've just moved from 10,000 to 1800, which was a vast amount of time, and we're moving much too quickly. We will slow down in the next module to explore these historical periods more, but this provides a brief overview. Then the split and the hierarchy begins to come back in a little bit, particularly with some of the ideas that began to become accepted with modern science in the 1700s and 1800s. Darwin's Origin of Species advances the idea that all species are related and they derive from the same source. So here we're being almost reconnected in a way that after a long period of time of being disconnected from our animal kin. Some different systems of categorization places humans within the primate order. So now we even begin to see ourselves in terms of lineage as evolving from a particular primate order. And the similarities become studied. So this is a period of studying through a more of a scientific lens and systems of categorization. Now, this does not mean that we've reconnected entirely with our and to a more communal status. Not at all. Though today behaviorists and ethologists show that there is no radical break between the emotional and intellectual capacities of humans and non-humans, that's not to say that they're exactly the same, but they can be lined up in a continuum rather than completely different systems. There's a kind of continuity there. Continuity of capacity for language, continuity of capacity for emotional response, for example, and we're going to look at these kind of things much later in the semester, but elephants and chimpanzees have both been well documented that they grieve when when a member of their clan dies. So there's grieving that happens, and that's just another example of kind of emotional continuity between humans and animals. And again, we will look. It's not until about the second half of the semester that we began to actually see what ethologists and behaviorists are discovering more currently. And this is a part of science that is quickly and rapidly growing and advancing and changing as more technology allows us to understand behaviors and in wild animals. We can't look at domestic animals and understand animals because they've been bred for particular human purposes. So in most ways, domestic species of animals are creations of humans. Genetics also show this similar relationship and this continuity between animals and humans. So then one of the questions that we began with is, what does the boundary between humans and animals rest? What does it rest upon? How do we still justify the idea that, for example, humans are persons and entitled to protections and rights, and animals are property and aren't entitled to any of those property or any of those protections or rights? So there's a long tradition of philosophers and ways of thinking that have kind of backed this up. The argument that animals lack rationality and the ability to reason. Some religious arguments that animals may lack a soul and therefore are fundamentally different. The Great Chain of Being, which we'll take a closer look at later, suggests that all life is created in a hierarchy, and that hierarchy is part of a natural system of things, and that that is the natural order of things. And again, that can apply to humans as well as animals, that if there's a hierarchy within the animal kingdoms, um, then there's also hierarchy, natural order of hierarchy within human. Um, and so you can kind of see that some of these belief systems are being challenged on a number of fronts. This idea that there's just naturally lower people who are lower than other people in the world is heavily challenged as we have spent most of the last 100 or so years in the United States anyway, um, being being focused on equality and equal treatment of humans. Um, but we haven't extended that to animals. We still think that, you know, pets are entitled to welfare protections that say chickens or slaughterhouse animals that are being used for food are not entitled to. So while we've begun to extend this notion of equality to our human kin, we certainly haven't done the same thing for um, different kinds of non-human animals. Um, so St. Thomas Aquinas, Descartes came, you know, he was a huge philosopher who was very influential. Um, Animals are automata, which means machines. So they just have mechanical reactions to things. There is no consideration. You know, part of this idea still comes up when we say that animals are just everything they do is based on instinct, and they're just kind of hardwired to have these reactions, and that's, you know, that's mechanical. That's therefore they can be almost dismissed as machines rather than living creatures. Um, Again, the ethologist and the animal behaviorist have found ample evidence to kind of challenge the idea, because they find that animals can adapt and learn and change their behavior, which would challenge the idea that they're simply instinctual machines. All right, and so then Kant, another very influential philosopher out of the Enlightenment period in Europe, um, he basically, his philosophy suggests that any animal that lacks rationality also does not have an ability to have a moral code. And if you don't have a moral code, if you don't have the capacity for morality, then you are not, then humans cannot include you in a system of protections and rights. All right, so I actually did want to kind of quickly come to the participation activity that you guys did. I'm gonna try to pull it up here or move it onto the right screen. Um, Many of the things we just looked at are similar to some of your responses when I asked you what distinctions or differences do you make between humans and animals. So here we have your list that you generated, and you'll find that it's not that different than the list we just looked at. The notion of right and wrong. Humans can understand what's right and wrong. Animals um, are operating more on fear. So fear and safety. So this is also kind of suggesting that animals don't have the same capacity for moral reasoning. That language is different. And so yes, some of these are conversations and points that are currently under hot debate and hot um, disagreement. As we study more and more animal languages, we're beginning to understand that there is complexity there. Now, whether it's more complex and whether it can capture abstract concepts in the same way that human language can capture abstract concepts, you know, is certainly still up for debate. Um, this instinct notion has been kind of disproven, particularly because we know now that animals learn and adapt. And uh, there are many studies that have shown that they can solve puzzles and they can figure things out. Therefore, they can't be operating completely on instinct. Sorry, I didn't mean to switch the screen. Um, Animals lack culture. This has been used. This is a significant one, that humans are the only being that has culture. That's also been disputed. Bat colonies, gorilla clans, elephant, I don't know what they're called, elephant clusters, groups. They are beginning to find some cultural differences based on geographical location, so that a clan of gorillas in one place might do things slightly different than a clan of gorillas in a different place, which would suggest culture. Um, the ability to lie, so we're going into these abstract thinking. Now, here we have to ask, if humans are the only things that have the ability to lie, what is a lie? If lie is deception or deceiving, then it seems like maybe other animals do have the ability to deceive or practice deception. So I'm not going to go through all of these and counter them, but I would question probably each one of these just a little bit. These are things that we kind of think we understand, but the science on this has been changing very quickly. And if you really start looking through the literature about things like human language or animal language, then and solving puzzles and animal ability to adapt and learn and use tools, many of these things show that humans are not unique. A lot still unquestioned, but it seems like, and here's the point, and then we'll be finished for this. The point is that we live as if these are all very fixed and that the line between humans and animals is very rigid and very clear. The point being here is that none of this appears to be as fixed and rigid as we originally, as maybe we once thought, and that the fluidity and the continuity between a human child learning to speak might be similar to how communication develops in other animals, or the way a human child might solve a puzzle may be similar to how a raven or a crow might solve a puzzle. So there seems to be a lot more continuity, and that these boundaries that we kind of live by and think that are true may be more constructed and may be more socially constructed so that we can maintain some notion of superiority and difference, which would then allow us to treat animals for our own benefit and use rather than recognizing them as having their own value separate from us. All right, that's all for right now.